Chapter 1. The Invitation to Willow Cottage. The train to St. Mary's Hollow rattled through the autumn dusk, its windows framing a patchwork of fields and hedgerows. Miss Jane Marple sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes sharp despite the gentle sway of the carriage. She was not one for unnecessary travel, but the letter in her handbag had been impossible to ignore. Clara Wentworth, an old friend from her school days, had written with an urgency that was both veiled and unmistakable. "Come, Jane," the letter read. "There's something amiss here, and I need your clear head. Willow Cottage, Friday." St. Mary's Hollow was not unlike St. Mary Mead, though its cobbled lanes and thatched roofs felt touched by a curious modernity. Solar panels gleamed discreetly on the vicarage, and the village shop boasted a digital notice board. Miss Marple noted these details as her taxi wound toward Willow Cottage, a charming house draped in ivy, its windows aglow against the gathering dark. Clara greeted her at the door, her silver hair pinned neatly, but her smile strained. "Jane, you're a blessing," she said, ushering her inside. The parlour was warm, scented with lavender and wood smoke, yet Clara's hands fidgeted as she poured tea. "It's nothing definite," she confessed, "but I feel watched, and there's talk of money. Too much of it, and not the honest kind." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression mild, but her mind alert. "Money, Clara, does tend to stir trouble. Who's involved?" Clara hesitated, then listed her guests for tomorrow's dinner party. Dr. Hugh Randall, a retired surgeon with a sharp tongue. Lydia Price, a young tech entrepreneur renting the old mill. Thomas Vane, a charming widower who ran an investment club. And Ellen Carver, Clara's housekeeper, who had been oddly distant lately. "They're all tied to this scheme," Clara said. "Thomas calls it a cooperative, but it feels like a trap." "A cooperative?" Miss Marple's needles paused. "For what purpose? Green energy, they say. Solar farms, wind turbines, big promises, big returns. But I've heard whispers, people losing savings, and Thomas dodging questions." Clara's voice dropped. "I invested a little myself, Jane. Foolish, perhaps." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Not foolish, Clara. Human. Tell me, have you noticed anything odd? Letters, perhaps, or visitors?" Clara frowned. "A note slipped under my door last week. It said, 'Beware the Judas kiss.' I thought it a prank, but—" she shivered. "It stayed with me." The conversation was interrupted by a knock. Ellen Carver, a wiry woman with guarded eyes, announced that dinner was ready. As they moved to the dining room, Miss Marple observed Ellen's stiff posture, the way her hands lingered near her apron pocket. A small thing, but Miss Marple had built solutions on smaller. That night in her guest room, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting idle. The village was quiet, but the air felt heavy, as if secrets were gathering like the mist outside. Clara's fear was real, though she masked it well. The note about a Judas kiss suggested betrayal, but by whom, and to what end? And why too late, as the story's title hinted? Miss Marple's mind turned to her village parallels. Old Mrs. Pike, who trusted too easily, or young Tommy, whose charm hid debts. People she knew were rarely what they seemed. As she drifted to sleep, a distant sound, a creak, perhaps a footstep, stirred her. She did not rise. Tomorrow's dinner would bring the players together, and Miss Marple would watch, listen, and wait. The truth, like a dropped stitch, would reveal itself in time. Detective, where are you solving from? Drop your location below. Want more chilling cases? Subscribe. Tomorrow's mystery gets darker. Stay sharp. Chapter 2. The Gathering Storm. The dining room of Willow Cottage glowed with candlelight, casting shadows on the oak-panelled walls. Miss Marple, seated near the head of the table, observed the guests with the quiet attentiveness of a gardener, noting weeds. Clara Wentworth, at the table's head, wore a forced smile as she passed a platter of roast lamb. The air was thick with polite chatter, but beneath it Miss Marple sensed a current of unease. Dr. Hugh Randall, a broad-shouldered man with a surgeon's precision in his gestures, dominated the conversation. "This cooperative of Thomas's," he said, slicing his meat, "is a gamble. Green energy's the future, but the numbers don't add up." His tone was sharp, and his glance at Thomas Vane carried a challenge. Thomas, lean and silver-haired, laughed easily, though his eyes flickered. "Hugh, you're too cautious. Our investors are seeing returns already. Solar farms are sprouting faster than Clara's roses." He winked at Clara, who flushed and looked away. Lydia Price, the young tech entrepreneur, tapped her wineglass with a manicured nail. Her sleek bob and tailored blazer stood out against the room's rustic charm. "I've run the data," she said coolly. "The projections are optimistic, but there's a cash flow issue. Someone's skimming, or the books are cooked." The words landed like a stone, and Miss Marple noted Thomas's hand tighten on his fork. Ellen Carver, serving potatoes, moved silently, her face a mask. Miss Marple caught her pausing behind Lydia, as if listening too closely. A small thing, but Miss Marple filed it away, recalling a maid in St. Mary Mead who eavesdropped to sell gossip. Clara steered the talk to safer ground. Village Fates, the new library. But the tension lingered. Miss Marple, nibbling her meal, asked gently, "Mr. Vane, how did you choose your investors? It sounds a selective group." Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Friends, mostly. People like Clara, who trust in progress. We're a community, not a corporation." His charm was polished, yet Miss Marple thought of young Mr. Ellis, whose smooth talk hid a swindle. As dessert was served, apple tart with cream, a gust rattled the windows and the candles flickered. Lydia glanced at her phone, frowning. "No signal. Typical village nonsense." Dr. Randall snorted, muttering about modern nonsense, while Thomas offered to check the router. Miss Marple watched him leave, noting his hurried step. Clara leaned toward Miss Marple, whispering, "Jane, it's worse than I said. I heard Thomas arguing with someone last night, outside late. He mentioned repaying and no more. Delays. I'm afraid he's in deeper than he lets on." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Fear makes shadows, Clara. Let's see what light tomorrow brings." But her mind was busy, weaving threads. The cooperative's murky finances, Lydia's accusation, the note about a Judas kiss. Betrayal loomed, but who was the betrayer, and who the betrayed? As the party broke up, Ellen cleared the table, her movements brisk. Miss Marple lingered, pretending to adjust her shawl. "Ellen," she said softly, "you've known Clara long. Is she often so worried?" Ellen's eyes darted up, then down. "She's fanciful, ma'am. Too trusting. Always has been." Her voice was flat, but her hands trembled slightly. Miss Marple smiled, thanking her, and made her way upstairs. In her room, she sat by the fire, knitting, forgotten. The dinner had been a stage, each guest playing a part. Thomas's charm, Lydia's calculations, Hugh's scepticism, Ellen's silence, all pieces of a puzzle. The storm outside grew louder, mirroring the one brewing within Willow Cottage. Miss Marple knew the next move would come soon, and she would be ready to catch it. Chapter 3. The Whisper of Betrayal. The morning sun filtered through Willow Cottage's lace curtains, softening the edges of a night that had left Miss Marple sleepless. She sat at the breakfast table, her toast untouched, her eyes scanning the room as Clara poured tea with unsteady hands. The dinner party's tensions lingered like a fog, and the cryptic note about a Judas kiss weighed on Miss Marple's mind. Clara had dismissed it as a prank, but Miss Marple knew better. Such words were rarely idle. As Ellen Carver cleared the plates, Miss Marple noted her quick glances toward the hallway. "Ellen," she said mildly, "did you find anything unusual while tidying this morning? A letter, perhaps?" Ellen's shoulders stiffened, but she shook her head. "Nothing, ma'am. Just dishes." Her voice was too curt, and Miss Marple smiled, storing the moment like a dropped handkerchief. Clara, pale and distracted, excused herself to fetch her shawl. Alone, Miss Marple slipped into the parlour, where last night's wine-glasses still stood. On the sideboard, half hidden by a vase, she found it, a folded scrap of paper, its edges worn. The words, scrawled in black ink, read, "The Judas kiss comes too late. Trust no one." No signature, no date. Miss Marple tucked it into her sleeve, her heart quickening. The note was no prank. It was a warning, and its echo of betrayal suggested a plan gone awry. Footsteps interrupted her thoughts. Lydia Price entered, her phone in hand, her expression taut. "Miss Marple, you're up early," she said, her tone clipped. "Clara's jumpy today. Something about a missing key." "A key?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "To what, I wonder?" Lydia shrugged. "Her study, I think. She's paranoid about that room." She hesitated, then added, "I checked Thomas's cooperative online. The website's a shell. Fancy graphics, no substance. I'd bet my startup he's hiding losses." Miss Marple nodded, recalling Lydia's sharp words at dinner. "You suspect fraud, then?" "Fraud? Or worse?" Lydia's voice dropped. "Someone's been emailing me anonymously, warning me to pull out. I thought it was Clara, but now I'm not sure." She glanced at the door, then left abruptly as Clara returned. Clara's face was ashen. "Jane, I found this under my study door." She held out another note, its script matching the first. "Too late for regrets. The kiss is given." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. 2 notes, both hinting at betrayal, both vague yet deliberate. "Clara," she said gently, "who has access to your study?" "Only me," Clara said, "and Ellen for cleaning. The key's kept in my desk, but I couldn't find it this morning." Her voice trembled. "Jane, what does it mean?" Marple patted her arm. "It means someone wishes to unsettle you, but fear clouds judgment. Let's keep our wits clear." She did not mention the first note, still hidden in her sleeve. Clara needed calm, not more alarm. As they spoke, Dr. Hugh Randall arrived, his coat damp from the morning mist. "Clara," "You look dreadful," he said bluntly. "What's this nonsense about notes?" Clara flushed, stammering, and Miss Marple interjected smoothly, "Just village gossip, Doctor. You know how it spreads." Hugh grunted, unconvinced, and Miss Marple watched him closely. His brusqueness felt practised, like a man hiding more than manners. She thought of Mr. Hodges in St. Mary Mead, whose gruffness masked a guilty conscience. The morning passed quietly, but the notes gnawed at Miss Marple. 2 warnings, 1 found, 1 planted. A key missing, a cooperative under suspicion, and a house full of secrets. Someone was weaving a web, but the threads were tangled. As she knitted by the fire, her needles clicking, Miss Marple felt the pattern forming. The Judas kiss was close, and she would not let it pass unnoticed. Chapter 4. The Midnight Scream. The clock in Willow Cottage struck 11, its chimes swallowed by the wind howling outside. Miss Marple, in her guest room, sat by the lamp, her knitting idle as she turned the 2 cryptic notes over in her mind. The Judas kiss comes too late, and too late for regrets. The kiss is given. The words pointed to a betrayal, but the timing puzzled her. Why too late? She thought of Clara's missing study key and Lydia's talk of fraud. The cooperative, she suspected, was the knot tying this tangle together. A scream shattered her thoughts, high and sharp, cutting through the storm. Miss Marple rose, slipping on her shawl, and moved swiftly to the hallway. Lights flickered on as Clara, pale in her nightgown, appeared at the top of the stairs. "Jane, what was that?" she gasped. "Stay here," Miss Marple said calmly, though her heart raced. She descended to the back door, where the scream had seemed to originate. The door stood ajar, rain slanting in. Outside, in the garden's dim glow, a figure lay crumpled near the rose bushes. Lydia Price, her blazer soaked, her face pale but breathing. Dr. Hugh Randall, summoned by Clara, pushed past with his medical bag. "She's alive," he barked, checking her pulse. "Shock, maybe a blow to the head. Help me get her inside." Thomas Vane, dishevelled in a dressing gown, assisted, while Ellen Carver hovered, her eyes wide but unreadable. In the parlour, Lydia stirred on the sofa, a blanket draped over her. "Someone pushed me," she murmured. "In the garden. I didn't see." Her voice was weak, but Miss Marple caught the flicker of fear in her eyes. Hugh administered a sedative, insisting she rest, but Miss Marple lingered, her mind sharp. "Miss Price," she said gently, "what were you doing outside so late?" Lydia's gaze darted away. "I needed air. Couldn't sleep." A weak excuse, Miss Marple thought, but she pressed no further. Not yet. As the household settled, Miss Marple examined the garden. The rain had muddied the path, but near the rose bushes she found a single footprint. Small, perhaps a woman's. Nearby, a glint caught her eye. A silver key, half buried in the soil. She pocketed it, her lips pursing. Clara's study key, no doubt. But how had it reached the garden? Back inside, Clara was near tears. "Jane, this is madness. First notes, now this. What's happening?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "Someone is frightened, Clara, and frightened people make mistakes. We'll find the truth." In her room, Miss Marple sat, piecing it together. Lydia's attack was no accident, But was she victim or conspirator? The key suggested someone had tried to hide it or plant it. Thomas's cooperative loomed large, its promises of wealth a lure for greed or desperation, and Ellen, her silence was too heavy, like Mrs. Green in St. Mary Mead, who knew more than she told. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the notes. A Judas kiss implied betrayal by a friend, but too late hinted at a plan gone wrong. Had Lydia stumbled on a secret, or was she part of it? The footprint nagged at her. Ellen's shoes were small, but so were Clara's. And Hugh's quick arrival, Thomas's nervous glances, each added a thread to the web. She closed her eyes, the scream echoing in her memory. The night had shifted the game, exposing a crack in someone's facade. Tomorrow she would tug at that crack, gently but firmly, until the truth spilled out. For now, she locked her door and returned to her knitting, the needles clicking like a countdown. Chapter 5. Shadows of the Past. The morning after Lydia's attack, Willow Cottage felt like a house holding its breath. Miss Marple sat in the parlour, her knitting a pretext as she watched Clara pace, her hands wringing a handkerchief. The silver key, now hidden in Miss Marple's handbag, was indeed for Clara's study, confirmed by a discreet test before breakfast. Its presence in the garden gnawed at her, a clue pointing to carelessness or cunning. Lydia, pale but composed, joined them, a bandage on her temple. "I'm fine," she insisted, though her eyes flicked nervously. Dr. Hugh Randall, sipping coffee, muttered about concussions, while Thomas Vane, unusually subdued, avoided her gaze. Ellen Carver moved silently, serving tea, her face a blank slate. Miss Marple noted it all, her mind tracing patterns like threads in a tapestry. "Clara," Miss Marple said gently, "tell me about this cooperative. You mentioned a past venture, something that failed?" Clara hesitated, glancing at Thomas, who stiffened. "It was years ago," she said. "A property deal before I moved here. Thomas and I were partners with others. It collapsed. Bad loans, worse decisions. I lost a good deal, but Thomas, he took it harder." Thomas forced a smile. "Old wounds, Clara. I've moved on. The cooperative's different. Clean energy, not risky land deals." His charm was strained, and Miss Marple thought of Mr. Bates in St. Mary Mead, whose smiles hid debts. Lydia interjected, her voice sharp. "Is it different? I found records online. Your old company, Thomas, was tied to fraud claims. Investors sued. Sound familiar?" Thomas's face darkened, but before he could reply, Hugh snorted. "Fraud's a strong word, Miss Price. Mind your accusations." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. "Dr. Randall, were you part of that venture too?" Hugh's jaw tightened. "I lent them money," he admitted. "Lost it all. But I'm no fool now. Stayed clear of Thomas's new scheme." His bluntness felt calculated, like a man distancing himself from trouble. Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Jane, I trusted Thomas again. After all that, was I wrong?" Miss Marple patted her arm. "Trust is no fault, Clara, but it's wise to question." She turned to Ellen, who lingered by the door. "Ellen, you've been here longest. Did you know of this old business?" Ellen's hands froze on her tray. "Heard bits, ma'am. Clara was heartbroken then. Didn't think Mr. Sir Vane would come back. Her voice was flat, but her eyes darted to Thomas, a flash of something anger beneath her reserve. Later, Miss Marple slipped into the village library, a quaint room with a modern computer nook. A quick search, guided by a helpful librarian, confirmed Lydia's claims. Thomas's old company had collapsed amid lawsuits, with whispers of embezzlement. Clara's name appeared as a minor investor, but another name caught Miss Marple's eye. Ellen Carver, listed as a creditor who lost her savings. A small detail, but it shifted the puzzle. Back at the cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, the key and notes in her thoughts. Ellen's loss explained her guardedness, perhaps her resentment. The past venture linked Clara, Thomas and Hugh, with Lydia stirring the pot. The Judas kiss suggested a friend's betrayal, but the old failure hinted at motives rooted deep, greed, revenge or shame. The garden attack and the planted key pointed to someone desperate to hide or reveal. As rain tapped the windows, Miss Marple's mind turned to the study. The key was a lure, but to what? She resolved to explore it quietly before the next move in this dangerous game. The shadows of the past were long, and someone was still running from them. Chapter 6. The False Alibi. The afternoon light slanted through Willow Cottage's windows, casting long shadows across the parlour. Miss Marple sat with her knitting, her eyes soft, but her mind razor-sharp, piecing together the threads of the past and present. Lydia's attack, the cryptic notes, and the old business failure formed a pattern, but the key to Clara's study and Ellen's hidden loss suggested deeper currents. Someone was lying, and Miss Marple suspected the cracks would show soon. Clara, still shaken, had retreated to her room, leaving the guests to their uneasy truce. Miss Marple seized the moment to probe. "Mr. Vane," she said, her voice mild, as she caught Thomas in the hallway. "Where were you last night when Miss Price was attacked? I recall you arrived quickly." Thomas's smile faltered. "I was in my room reading. Heard the scream and ran down. Why?" His tone was light, but his hands fidgeted, betraying nerves. Miss Marple nodded as if satisfied, but filed his answer away. A man like Thomas, she thought, was too charming to be careless. She found Lydia in the garden, inspecting the spot where she'd fallen. "Miss Price," Miss Marple said, "you said you went out for air, but it was stormy. Perhaps you were meeting someone?" Lydia's eyes narrowed. "No one," she snapped. "I told you, I couldn't sleep." But her fingers twisted her bracelet, a tell Miss Marple knew from nervous girls in St. Mary Mead. Dr. Hugh Randall was next, polishing his glasses in the dining room. "Doctor," Miss Marple began, "you were quick to aid Miss Price. Were you already awake?" Hugh grunted. "Old habits. I don't sleep much." Heard the scream, grabbed my bag. His brusqueness was steady, but his glance toward the garden was too sharp, as if checking for watchers. Ellen Carver proved harder to corner, bustling in the kitchen. Miss Marple lingered, offering to dry a dish. "Ellen, you must hear much. Working here. Did anyone leave the house before the scream?" Ellen's cloth paused. "Can't say, ma'am. I was in my room, door shut." Her voice was flat, but her eyes flicked to the back door, where Lydia had been found. By evening, Miss Marple's gentle questions had stirred unease. At dinner, The group was subdued, forks scraping plates. Clara, pale, mentioned the missing key again, and Thomas coughed, changing the subject. Miss Marple watched, noting how Lydia avoided Thomas's gaze, how Hugh's gruffness seemed forced, how Ellen's hands trembled serving soup. Later, in the quiet of her room, Miss Marple reviewed the alibis. Thomas claimed to be reading, Lydia seeking air, Hugh sleepless, Ellen shut away, all vague, none verifiable. She thought of Mr. Turner in St. Mary Mead, whose alibi crumbled when his reading lacked a book. Someone's story was false, likely tied to the key or the attack. The notes haunted her. The Judas kiss comes too late, and the kiss is given suggested a betrayal planned and executed, but misfired. Ellen's loss in the old venture gave her motive, but Thomas's charm hid secrets, Lydia's accusations pointed fingers, and Hugh's detachment felt like a shield. The study, locked and alluring, held answers. She was sure of it. As she knitted, a floorboard creaked outside her door. Miss Marple froze, listening. Silence followed, but her pulse quickened. Someone was moving in the night, testing boundaries. Tomorrow she would try the study key, but tonight she locked her door and kept her knitting needles close. The false alibi was a crack, and she would pry it open, stitch by stitch. Chapter 7. The Locked Study. The morning was crisp, with mist curling around Willow Cottage like a secret. Miss Marple, up early, sipped tea in the parlour, the silver study key a reassuring weight in her pocket, the false alibis from last night, Thomas's reading, Lydia's midnight stroll, Hugh's sleeplessness, Ellen's closed door, were flimsy, but the study, she sensed, held the thread to unravel them. The notes about a Judas kiss, and the attack on Lydia pointed to a betrayal gone wrong, and the locked room was its heart. Clara, pale and distracted, joined her. "Jane, I can't shake this feeling. Someone's been in my study. Papers moved, a drawer ajar." Miss Marple's eyes sharpened. "Then we must look, Clara. May I try the key?" Clara nodded, her hands twisting her shawl. The study door, tucked at the end of a dim hallway, yielded to the key with a soft click. Inside, the room was orderly. A desk, bookshelves, a single window overlooking the garden. Miss Marple's gaze swept the space, noting a faint scratch on the desk's lock, as if forced. Clara hovered, anxious, as Miss Marple opened drawers. Most held bills and letters, but one contained a ledger, its pages marked with sums and initials, TV, HR, LP, and others unfamiliar. "Clara," Miss Marple said, "is this the cooperative's record?" Clara peered at it, frowning. "It looks like Thomas's handwriting, but I never saw this. These figures, thousands moving to offshore accounts." Her voice trembled. "Jane, is he stealing?" Before Miss Marple could reply, a crash came from the hallway. They hurried out to find a vase shattered, Ellen standing over it, her face flushed. "Slipped, ma'am," she muttered, but her eyes darted to the open study door. Miss Marple smiled kindly. "No harm, Ellen. Fetch a broom." As Ellen left, Miss Marple whispered to Clara. She was listening. "We must be cautious." Back in the study, Miss Marple found a crumpled note beneath the desk, its script matching the others. "The kiss was meant for you. Too late now." Her pulse quickened. This note, hidden here, suggested the study was a target. But for what? She slipped it into her sleeve, then noticed a file labelled Old Ventures. Inside were documents from the failed property deal, Clara's investment, Thomas's signature, and a creditor list with Ellen's name, her loss starkly underlined. As they locked the study, footsteps approached. Thomas appeared, his charm strained. "Clara, what's this about the study? I heard a crash." His eyes flicked to the key in Miss Marple's hand, and she tucked it away, her expression bland. "Just tidying, Mr. Vane. Clara's papers needed sorting." Thomas lingered, then left, and Miss Marple's mind raced. The ledger pointed to fraud, the note to a targeted betrayal. Ellen's eavesdropping and Thomas's unease were no coincidence. She thought of Mrs. Lane in St. Mary Mead, whose snooping hid theft. Was Ellen protecting Clara or herself? And Thomas, with his offshore accounts, was he the Judas or a pawn? That afternoon Miss Marple sat by the fire, knitting as Clara fretted. "Jane, if Thomas is cheating us, what do we do?" Miss Marple's needles clicked. "We wait, Clara. A thief moves when he feels safe." But her thoughts were on the study's contents, now locked away, and the note's chilling words. Someone had tried to destroy evidence, or plant it. The kiss had misfired, but the danger was far from over. As dusk fell, a faint smell of smoke drifted through the house. Miss Marple rose, her heart steady but alert. The study she feared was under threat, and the betrayer was closing in. Chapter 8. The Confession? That wasn't the faint smell of smoke sent Miss Marple hurrying to the hallway, her shawl clutched tight. Willow Cottage was quiet, but the acrid scent grew stronger near the study. She found Clara there, pale and clutching, a smouldering rag, the study door ajar. "Jane!" Clara gasped. "I saw smoke under the door. Someone tried to burn it." A small pile of papers, singed but intact, lay on the floor, the ledger among them. Miss Marple's eyes swept the scene. "Quickly, Clara, open the window." As Clara complied, Miss Marple examined the rag. Oily, deliberate. Someone had tried to destroy the ledger, but fled, perhaps startled. She thought of the notes. The kiss was meant for you. Too late. Now? The betrayer was panicking, their plan unravelling. By evening, the household gathered in the parlour, tense as a drawn bow. Lydia, her bandage fresh, eyed Thomas warily. Hugh Randall scowled, while Ellen served tea, her hands steady, but her gaze averted. Miss Marple, seated with her knitting, let the silence simmer, knowing pressure cracked facades. It was Lydia who broke. "I can't stay quiet," she burst out, standing. "I took money from the cooperative, small amounts to cover my startup's debts. I thought no one would notice." Her voice shook, and Clara gasped. Thomas's face hardened. "You stole from us," he snapped, but Lydia shook her head. "It wasn't stealing. I was going to repay it, but someone knew. Those emails I got, warning me to stop." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Miss Price, did you write the notes? The ones about a Judas kiss?" Lydia blinked, confused. "No, I thought they were about me, but I didn't write them." Her confession, Miss Marple saw, was a half-truth, meant to deflect. Like young Sally in St. Mary Mead, who admitted to petty theft to hide a larger crime. Hugh snorted. "Convenient confessing now. What about the attack on you? Staged, was it?" Lydia flushed, But before she could reply, Ellen dropped a teacup, the crash startling everyone. "Sorry, ma'am," she mumbled, but Miss Marple caught her trembling hands. Ellen knew more than she let on. Clara, near tears, turned to Miss Marple. "Jane, what does this mean? Is Lydia the betrayer?" Miss Marple's voice was calm. "A confession, Clara, is sometimes a shield. We must look deeper." She glanced at Thomas, whose silence felt heavy, and Hugh, whose gruffness masked calculation. The singed ledger, she suspected, held the real secret, and someone had risked fire to hide it. Later, in her room, Miss Marple reviewed the clues. Lydia's theft was a distraction, not the Judas kiss. The notes pointed to a friend's betrayal, and the ledger's offshore accounts suggested fraud on a grand scale. Ellen's loss in the old venture gave her motive, but Thomas's charm and Hugh's detachment were equally suspect. The smoke was a desperate act, and the small footprint in the garden, likely Ellen's or Clara's, nagged at her. She opened the singed ledger, saved from the fire. One entry stood out, a transfer to EC, dated weeks ago, before the notes began. Ellen Carver, or a coincidence? Miss Marple's mind turned to Mrs. Pike, whose grudge fueled sabotage. The studies near burning was a misstep, exposing the betrayer's fear. As midnight chimed, a soft knock came at her door. Miss Marple opened it to find Clara, eyes wide. "Jane, I found another note in my room. It says, 'The Judas is closer than you think.'" Miss Marple's heart steadied. The net was tightening, and tomorrow she would lay her trap. Chapter 9. The Judas Revealed. The morning sun barely pierced the fog shrouding Willow Cottage, but Miss Marple's mind was clear as crystal. The notes, the ledger, Lydia's confession, the singed study, and the latest warning, "The Judas is closer than you think," formed a pattern she could no longer ignore. The betrayer had overplayed their hand, and today she would expose them. She requested Clara to gather everyone in the parlour after breakfast, her voice gentle but firm. The group assembled tense and wary. Clara sat by the fire, clutching the latest note. Lydia, her bandage stark against her pale skin, avoided Thomas's gaze. Hugh Randall leaned against the mantel, his scowl deep. Thomas, his charm frayed, fidgeted with his cufflinks. Ellen Carver stood by the door, her face impassive, but her hands clasped tightly. Miss Marple, knitting in her lap, began. "My friends," she said, her tone mild, "this house has seen fear, lies, and a betrayal planned too late. The Judas kiss was no prank. It was a warning of fraud and vengeance, but the plan misfired." She held up the singed ledger. "This records the cooperative's truth. Funds siphoned to offshore accounts, orchestrated by Thomas Vane." Thomas paled, starting to protest, but Miss Marple raised a hand. "You promised wealth, Mr. Vane, but you stole. First in the old venture, then here. Clara trusted you, as did others." She turned to Lydia. "Miss Price confessed to theft, but it was a cover. You suspected Thomas and dug into his accounts, didn't you? That's why you were attacked, to silence you." Lydia nodded, her voice low. "I found transfers, coded to hide names. I confronted him privately, but someone else knew." Her eyes flicked to Ellen, and Miss Marple followed her gaze. "Ellen," Miss Marple said softly. "You lost everything in Thomas's old scheme. You wrote the notes, didn't you? To warn Clara, to scare Thomas. The Judas kiss was your plan to expose him, but it came too late. He'd already moved the money." Ellen's composure cracked, her eyes filling with tears. "I wanted justice," she whispered. "He ruined me, and Clara was next. I slipped the notes, but I didn't attack Lydia." Miss Marple's needles clicked once. "No, you didn't. The footprint in the garden was yours, Ellen, from hiding the study key to protect the ledger. But the attack was Dr. Randall's doing." Hugh's head snapped up, his face red. "Nonsense!" he barked. But Miss Marple continued, calm as ever. "Doctor, you lent money to the old venture and lost it. You suspected Thomas's new fraud, but stayed silent, hoping to recover your share. When Lydia grew too close to the truth, you followed her to the garden and struck her, thinking to scare her off. The key, dropped in panic, was meant to frame Ellen." Hugh's hands clenched, his silence damning. Clara gasped. "Hugh! Ellen? Why?" Miss Marple's eyes softened. "Greed, Clara, and old wounds. Ellen's betrayal was meant to save you, but too late. The money's gone. Hugh's was to protect his gain, but he misjudged Lydia's resolve." Ellen sobbed, confessing to the notes but denying violence. Hugh, cornered, muttered about no proof, but his defeat was clear. Thomas, exposed, slumped, his charm dissolved. Miss Marple folded her knitting. "The police will sort the rest. Betrayal, like a dropped stitch, unravels when you tug." The group dispersed, shaken. Miss Marple sat quietly. The Judas kiss had struck, but its timing, too late, had spared Clara worse loss. The truth, as always, lay in the human heart, and she had merely followed its beat. Chapter 10. The Quiet Aftermath. The fog had lifted from St. Mary's Hollow, and Willow Cottage basked in the soft glow of an autumn afternoon. Miss Marple sat in the parlour, her knitting a gentle rhythm as Clara poured tea, her hands steadier now. The police had come and gone, taking Thomas Vane, Dr. Hugh Randall, and a tearful Ellen Carver for questioning. The ledger, notes and key were in official hands, and the cooperative's fraud was unravelling, though much of the money was likely lost. The village buzzed with whispers, but peace, fragile as it was, had returned. Clara set down the teapot, her eyes weary but grateful. "Jane, I don't know how you saw it all. Thomas's deceit, Ellen's notes, Hugh's violence. I trusted them, and they—" Her voice faltered, and Miss Marple patted her hand. "Trust is no fault, Clara," she said softly. "It's the coin of friendship, but some spend it falsely. Ellen meant to protect you in her way, though her Judas kiss came too late. Hugh and Thomas let greed blind them, as people often do." She thought of St. Mary Mead, where similar betrayals, smaller perhaps, had taught her the heart's frailties. Lydia Price, packing to leave, paused at the door. Her bandage was gone, her confidence returning. "Miss Marple, I owe you," she said. "I was in over my head poking at Thomas's accounts. If you hadn't—" She trailed off, and Miss Marple smiled. "You're young, Miss Price. Curiosity is a fine thing, but caution tempers it. Safe travels." As Lydia left, Clara sighed. "What now, Jane? The village feels tainted." Miss Marple's needles clicked, a soothing counterpoint. Villages! Heal, Clara. Gossip fades and kindness returns. You'll find new friends and perhaps be warier, but not colder. She thought of Mrs. Clement, who rebuilt trust after a neighbour's deceit. That evening, Miss Marple walked the garden where Lydia had fallen. The rose bushes, pruned and tidy, showed no trace of that night's chaos. She paused by the spot where the key had lain, dropped in Hugh's panic. The too late of the betrayal lingered in her mind. Ellen's warnings, delayed by fear. Thomas's fraud, exposed too late to save Clara's savings. Hugh's attack, mistimed and futile. Betrayal, she mused, often undid itself, given time. Back inside, Clara offered a shawl, but Miss Marple declined, her train due soon. You've given me more than enough, Clara. Tea, trust, and a puzzle to ponder. Clara laughed, a sound like sunlight breaking through clouds. You're welcome any time, Jane. I'll lock my study tighter next time. As the taxi carried Miss Marple to the station, she gazed at the village, its cobbles, its modern touches, its secrets now laid bare. Human nature, she reflected, was the same everywhere, generous, flawed, and endlessly surprising. She opened her knitting bag, her fingers brushing the first note she'd found. The Judas kiss comes too late, she smiled faintly. The kiss had come and gone, but truth, like her stitches, held fast. The train whistle sounded, and Miss Marple settled by the window, her needles resuming their dance. St. Mary's Hollow faded behind her, but its lessons would linger, tucked into her memory like a well-worn pattern. Home awaited, and with it perhaps another mystery to unravel. Epilogue. A letter from St. Mary's Hollow. The fire crackled in Miss Marple's cottage in St. Mary Mead, casting a warm glow over her parlour. She sat in her favourite armchair, a letter from Clara Wentworth open on her lap, her knitting needles resting for once. Outside, winter's first frost dusted the garden, but inside all was cosy and still. The adventure in St. Mary's Hollow felt distant, yet its lessons lingered like a familiar tune. Clara's letter was brief but bright. "Dear Jane," it began, "the village is quieter now. Thomas awaits trial, and Hugh has left for good. Ellen, bless her, wrote to apologize. She's working at the vicarage finding peace. I've joined the library committee, and my study's locked tight. Your visit saved more than my savings. It saved my spirit. Come back soon." Miss Marple smiled, folding the letter. Clara's warmth, like her tea, had endured. She thought of the Judas kiss, Ellen's well-meant betrayal, too late to stop Thomas's fraud, Hugh's violent misstep, Lydia's reckless courage. Each had played their part, unaware how their secrets wove together. Miss Marple saw it clearly now, as she always did. Human nature, with its hopes and hurts, was the true puzzle, solved not by cleverness, but by listening. A knock at the door stirred her. Mrs. Bantry, her neighbour, bustled in, cheeks pink from the cold. "Jane, you've been quiet since your trip. Any scandals to share?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Only a small one, Dolly. Tea?" As they chatted, Miss Marple's gaze drifted to her knitting bag, where a new skein of wool waited. Another pattern, another story, would come soon enough. In St. Mary's Hollow, Clara might be pruning her roses, and in St. Mary Mead, life hummed on. Betrayals faded, trust grew back, and Miss Marple, ever watchful, knew the world would always offer another mystery to unravel, stitch by gentle stitch.